Hello and welcome to Smaulgld's Russian gold reserve update for the month of May 2018. Russia adds another 19 tons of gold in May, and their gold reserves now exceed the U.S. Treasury holdings. The Russian central bank gold reserves rose to 1,928.416 tons in May. Russian gold reserves are now the fifth largest in the world, as Russia added another 600,000 ounces of gold, or approximately 18.66 tons, to reserves in May. Remember, in 2017, Russia had added a record 224 tons of gold to reserves. And since June 2015, the Central Bank of Russia has added over 646 tons of gold to reserves. Overall Russian reserves, however, did fall from about 459.8 billion in April to about 456.6 billion in May. Russian holdings of U.S. Treasuries fell to 48.1 billion in April 2018. Meanwhile, their gold reserves are worth 80.551 billion as of the end of May, and that constitutes about 17.6% of overall Russian reserves. So for the first time ever, Russia's gold reserves now exceed the value of their U.S. Treasury holdings. The U.S. Treasury Department revealed that Russia's holdings of U.S. Treasuries fell nearly by half from a March total of 96.1 billion all the way down to 48.7 billion in April. And then according to the Central Bank of Russia, their gold reserves are worth about 81.1 billion in April. That was up from 80.5 billion in March. Their gold reserve value in dollars did fall in May, even though they added the 600,000 ounces due to the price of gold falling. So the value of the Central Bank of Russia's gold reserves were 80.511 billion in May, down from the 81.1 billion at the end of April. Now keep in mind, Russia does little trade with the United States and has also been subject to a series of sanctions, mostly inspired and led by the United States. So Russia has little need to hold U.S. Treasuries other than as a secure foreign reserve asset. But Russia does not buy many goods from the United States. It doesn't buy oil from the United States. In fact, Russia is a major oil producer in its own right. So the drop of the 47.4 billion in U.S. Treasuries from just March to April was the largest shedding of U.S. Treasuries by the Central Bank of Russia since September of 2016, when it dumped 11 billion U.S. Treasuries, taking their then total down to 74.6 billion. However, after they dumped that 11 billion worth in Treasuries in September 2016, since then, they had begun to rebuild their U.S. Treasury holdings, boosting them all the way back up at a peak of 108.7 billion in May of just 2017. Here is a chart that shows the relatively stable U.S. Treasury holdings over the past year. You can see they were mostly over 100 billion, and their gold reserve, you can see them steadily rising in dollar value. Now their gold reserves look a little better when the price of gold isn't rising and falling, because they have been adding significant tonnage, but you can see the dollar value hasn't increased that dramatically. However, by April, their gold reserves were worth in dollar amounts more than their U.S. Treasury reserves were worth for the first time. You can see the green bar here shows that the Treasury holdings were always higher than the gold holdings. Also went back, prepared a chart going back to 2016. You just see the same thing, but you can see the trend of the gold going from 51.4 billion in January 2016 all the way up to 81 billion in April. Now we mentioned it fell to 80.55 in May, but we don't have yet the U.S. Treasury numbers for May yet. We'll get those next month, and we'll just update the chart. But you can see there's this blue sky ahead of between the green line and the gold line for the longest period of time, and then boom, in April you see it go down. So we'll be watching to see whether this is a permanent feature of Russia's Treasury mix, Russia's foreign reserve mix, or whether they'll slowly increase their treasuries again. Right now, according to the Central Bank of Russia, the head of the Central Bank of Russia said today that less than half of their reserves now are in dollar-denominated reserves, and that's part of their reallocation. Let's take a look at some more charts here. You can see a more linear chart just based on Russia's adding gold by tons, not by dollars. And you can see it's basically each and every month heading straight higher. About 647 tons since this chart was I first started calculating by month, or keeping track by month, since June 2015 through May of 2018. Russia's added about 650 tons. Here is a longer term chart that shows Russia hasn't always had this voracious gold appetite. This really started in the Putin era here, and you can see they were net sellers of gold in the late 1990s and early 2000s, as were other central banks, including the Central Bank of England, or the Bank of England, and the Swiss National Bank. If you're interested in adding gold to your own stack, you can do so through the Smaulgld site at Golden Eagle Coin, SD Bullion, or Money Metals Exchange. You can also find the links below this BitChute and this YouTube. If you do indeed purchase gold or silver through the links, you can compare pricing and shipping. It's not investment advice, but Smaulgld will get a small commission, so keep that in mind. It does help out the site if you are indeed going to buy gold or silver, and you pay no more no less than if you visited those sites on your own instead of through the affiliate links. Now, Russia monthly gold reserve additions from June 2014 to May 2018. You can see just about every month the Russian Central Bank has added gold, or there's a couple of months where they haven't added gold, and that's where the National Bank of Kazakhstan, has actually managed to put together a better streak than the Central Bank of Russia. I think they have added gold to their reserves for 66 or 67 months in a row, whereas Russia skipped a couple of months, but obviously Russia's total amount of gold that they're adding each and every month is much higher than the Central Bank of Kazakhstan. You could see certain months they added well over 1 million ounces, and you could see they're averaging about 500,000 or higher over the last few years. Now, we used to keep track of the Russian Central Bank versus the Chinese Central Bank, or the People's Bank of China. The People's Bank of China has not reported adding any gold since October 2016, which is coincidentally the month that the Chinese yuan was added to the IMF's, International Monetary Fund's, SDR, or special drawing rights. Doesn't mean that China isn't adding gold or importing gold or trading gold, or Chinese aren't buying gold. It just means that the central bank, the People's Bank of China, is not adding gold. Now, here is another curious or interesting fact to understand about Russia. Remember, the Russian ruble is a weak currency despite having a lot of gold and also being an oil exporter. But Russia is also, in addition to being a major oil producer, is also a major gold producer, second or third in the world, depending on how you calculate it. And they have been adding an increasing amount of their domestic gold mining production to their central bank's foreign reserves. And you can see here 208 tons of the 291 tons mined in 2015 went straight to the central bank. About 200 tons again in 2016 out of the 250 tons went to the central bank, and last year a record 224 tons out of the 260 tons went to the central bank of Russia. Russia is also sending the bulk of the remaining amounts between the red and the blue line to China, and this year they announced they'll also be exporting some of that gold to India. India, as you know, has to import just about all of its gold, and so getting some from Russia will help ease some of their demand constraints. Now, where does this put Russia? Its recent purchases, well, it passed China a few months back to take 5th place, and it looks like next on its sights are France at 2,435 tons, as Russia, or Central Bank of Russia, has 1,928 tons. This chart reflects what central banks report. I make no warranty or representation that any of these banks have what they say they have, although these are what are reported to the IMF, and this is also what the World Gold Council reports, and then some of these I can check on the central bank's websites, and this is what they are indeed reporting. So Russia is in 5th place here. Overall Russian gold reserves, overall Russian reserves in general have grown about 90 billion since January 2016. They have about 470 billion in foreign reserves. I think they have a goal to get to about 500 billion. And the gold that they have is approximates about 18% of their overall reserves. Now here's a chart that just shows the Russian holdings of U.S. Treasury in isolation. As I mentioned, you can see this is a 2-year chart. They had been in the 80s and the 70s, and then when Trump got elected, they moved up into the hundreds, and just recently in April, boom, you can see that big drop, one of the biggest drops I think ever for the Russian central bank. So we'll be keeping an eye on when that TIC report comes out later this month, next month, to see what their May holdings will be. Well, thank you very much for listening. If you enjoyed this report, please consider donating to Smaulgld by becoming a Smaulgld Patreon. You can do that right at the top of the Smaulgld website or at the link below this BitChute and YouTube, or you can donate via PayPal or Bitcoin or Litecoin. Again, links on the site below the BitChute and YouTube. Thank you very much for listening, and remember to join me every evening at 8 o'clock for a live stream covering topics from gold, silver, economics, and cryptocurrencies. Thank you very much.